rates around the world. Is that actually the case? Christopher Ryan is a psychologist and co-author of New York Times bestseller Sex at Dawn, The Prehistoric Origins of Modern Sexuality, and is in Australia for the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. His rather confronting question is, what if we have it all wrong? What if we're not meant to be with just the one partner? Well, Christopher Ryan joins me now. I guess my first question is, why do you argue that it's not normal for monogamy for people?
Because virtually all the data points to that conclusion. If you look at the primates most closely related to human beings, they're multi-male, multi-female maters. If you look at our bodies, we could get into details, but probably better not to, but the design of our genitalia, it very clearly says that we're not meant to be with one partner for a lifetime. But we're not saying, we're not telling anyone it's wrong to be monogamous. We're just saying it doesn't come naturally.
Because I could say to you, well, look, the human being, as a species, we have the ability to think for ourselves and make decisions,
yes,
and we have the power to decide.
Sure.
So if somebody decides to be monogamous, are they, you know, on the road to getting a hiding, basically? It's not possible? Are they kidding themselves?
No, not at all. My parents have been married for 50 years, happily and monogamously, as far as I know.
So it's not impossible.
It's not impossible, but because it runs against our evolved predispositions, there are challenges involved in it. It's like being a vegetarian. You can decide to be a vegetarian. It can be healthy, it can be ethical, it can be good in many different ways. But just because you've decided to become a vegetarian doesn't mean bacon suddenly stops smelling good.
So if we actually have sexual feelings towards somebody other than our partner, whether we act on them or not, is that a sign that our relationship is in trouble?
No, and that's one of the central points of the book, and that's one of the messages we're trying to get across to people, that the fact that that sort of sexual passion diminishes over time doesn't mean that there's a problem with you or your partner or your marriage. It simply means you're both Homo sapiens, and that's a natural occurrence when you've been together for a significant amount of time for our species.
And does this theory of yours apply both to heterosexuals and homosexuals?
Yes. Yeah.
Some people could say, you know, we were discussing this in the office before this interview, and, you know, I could argue a lot of men would say, of course, it's not natural to be monogamous, and they use it as an excuse for
Sure.
their behaviour, for their choices. A lot of women might be offended and say it's perfectly, you're perfectly able to be monogamous. So you sort of come into this debate between a battle of the sexes, if you like, that men are just using it as an excuse.
Yeah, but look at the way you phrase that. The men are saying it's not natural, and the women are saying you're able. Mm-hmm. Those aren't opposing views. It's not natural, but you are able, just like it's not natural for us to be vegetarians, but we are capable of that.
So where did this idea come from that we have to be monogamous, or that we should be monogamous, or that is something that is respected and looked up to? Where did it evolve from?
Well, it would be very difficult to do that in a few minutes, to explain in a few minutes, but essentially it's related to the advent of agriculture and the concept of private property that came into the human scene about 10,000 years ago at its earliest point, which is less than 5% of our existence as anatomically modern human beings that look just like us and have brains like us. So it's a very small amount of time.
So you're saying once we became used to having property as such, we became used to owning a partner?
Exactly, because when we have property, we have houses, we have domesticated animals, land, and so on, that's when it becomes important for me as a man with wealth to know that I'm leaving that wealth to my children.
Right.
Hunter-gatherer bands don't have any private property, so there's no reason for them to be concerned about whose children came from which man and so on. So we find very little concern with paternity among hunter-gatherers.
And so tell me, as you've been talking about this idea of yours and the research that you've done here in Australia, what sort of reaction have you been getting from audiences, and does it in any way differ from people in other countries where you must talk about this as well?
Well, the reaction at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas was very positive. It was a sold-out crowd. They were very responsive, got lots of laughs, and seemed quite comfortable. I'm not sure that's typical of Australian public in general. I think if you go to a Festival of Dangerous Ideas, you must have sort of an open-minded approach to these things. Right. We'll see. I'm going to Melbourne and Adelaide, and I'll get back to you.
And do you have any idea of whether Australians, as opposed to Americans, English, the French, are any different from anybody else when it comes to questions of monogamy?
It's very early. I've only been here a few days. I can't pronounce anything
I'm not going to ask you how you're
Australia.
testing out that theory. Christopher Ryan, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Overseas, the Republican presidential candidate